There's a fight inside all of us, a purpose that binds us together. We are all Aggies, and together, nothing can stand in our way. We are fearless on every front.
Why is TSTC the Get a Job College? We offer associate's degrees and certificates in more than 150 technical job fields, and we don't receive state funding until our graduates get a job. Find out more at tstc.edu. Texas State Technical College. Technically better.
I really don't want to.
Chris, okay.
You would think not. Yeah. Is this thing on? Oh, hello. Hello, everyone. Hi. Packed house tonight, or today. It's a long day. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming to our very important and very relevant panel. We have a lot of things to discuss. First of all, I'd like for our panelists to introduce themselves. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Gene Park. I'm a social media editor at the Washington Post. A lot of my focus of my work has been on Reddit and Twitch. Vivian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Vivian Schiller. I am the CEO of the Civil Foundation, which is part of Civil Media, which is a startup that supports quality journalism on a platform built on the blockchain. I have a long history in journalism, New York Times, NPR, CNN, NBC, Twitter.
I'm Roger McNamee. I've spent 35 years investing in Silicon Valley and America's tech companies, and I'm here because in 2006, I became a mentor to Mark Zuckerberg and then Sheryl Sandberg. And I've spent the last 2 years trying to make the country aware of the threat of social media to our democracy, to our public health, to our privacy, and to our economy.
Hi, I'm Siva Vaidyanathan. I'm a professor of media studies at the University of Virginia, although I have a BA and a PhD from the University of Texas, so happy to do that. And I've written a couple books that are important to this subject or relevant to this subject. Most recently, Anti-Social Media, How Facebook Disconnects Us and Undermines Democracy. So you know where I stand.
A book everyone should acquire. And he's having a signing after the session here across the street. I'm just saying, the book is really, really important.
Not as good as his book, which is coming out in February. Roger McNamee.
I have
Penguin.
no book coming out, but I'm Jim Brady, CEO of Spirited Media, in digital media for 25 years now. Most notably on this panel, I'm here because for 4 years I served as the pincushion as ESPN's ombudsman, and so I've learned a little bit about social media and the joys of being on the blunt end of it.
All right, well, I have no book, I just tweet, so I apologize for that. Let me start with a quote that I think really summarizes our panel very well. It's from Zeynep Tufekci, and she writes a lot about the sociological impacts on social media. And she's written recently, for the longest time we thought that as speech became more democratized, democracy itself would flourish. And as more and more people would broadcast their words and opinions, there would be an ever fiercer battle of ideas, with truth emerging as the winner, stronger from the fight. But in 2018, it's increasingly clear that more speech can, in fact, threaten democracy. The glut of information we now face, made possible by digital tools and social media platforms, can bury what is true, greatly elevate and amplify misinformation, and distract from what is important. So let's get the answer to the question right out for the panel. Is social media good for democracy? We do a quick yes or no, give or take 5 words, because I know it's complicated. So, Vivian.
Yes and no.
Okay.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
No, indisputable. It's really good for organizing events. It's horrific for deliberation. It's horrific for debate.
See, but we know your answer, yeah.
You don't want. I do want to point out that Zeynep Tufekci got her PhD from the University of Texas.
Yeah. So. Jim?
To stick to 5 words, not now, but could be.
Okay. I think the next question might be more important, and Roger, this is something that you brought up in our previous discussion. Can democracy survive social media? Let's go to an immediate concern, the midterms, right? We got an important election coming up in a couple weeks. During the 2016 elections, these platforms could not or did not act at the disinformation campaign happening right in the houses that they built. It's been 18 months, and the platforms are only now starting to admit their role. Give us your assessment of where they're at. Are they being proactive, still reactive? Roger, let's start with you.
So here's what the problem is. I love using Facebook. I like using Twitter. I love using YouTube. And I think most of us really like using these products. What the problem is that the way they're designed to monopolize our attention. And they do that because they sell advertising to survive. And there's nothing wrong with that except this. These products have giant artificial intelligence, and they create specific programming for each of us. Think of Facebook as 2.2 billion Truman shows, each person with their own set of facts, their own reality. That creates a situation where there's no incentive to listen to other points of view. There's no incentive to compromise. The problem that we have here is these companies, Facebook in particular, viewed having global reach, having the whole world connected on one network, is such an obviously good idea that it never occurred to them that people would use the products differently than they were intended to be used. It never occurred to them that emotional contagion could break out. So they never made provisions, either in terms of circuit breakers or containment strategies, to prevent that contagion from doing harm. They believe this so deeply that the changes that they've made are at the margin. They don't actually go after the core problem, which is the business model. And they've come much, much too late for the, Facebook's actually made some well-intended changes over the last couple of months. But those are changes that if they'd done them 2 years ago, might well have helped us for 2018. But as it is, we'll be lucky if they help us in 2020. I'm terrified, and the most important thing is they're going to use this stuff to suppress the vote. So we have to make everyone we know vote. I mean, vote whatever your conscience tells you to do, but everyone has to vote, because these things are the most perfect weapons of disinformation for voter suppression ever created.
Vivian, a lot of your work at Civil is concerned with information. How do you feel about what's going on right now?
Well, I agree with Roger. I want to, just because I feel like we are a social media platform bashing panel, which is fine. There is much to bash. I do want to say, and I'll tell you a word about Civil after that, but I do want to say my closest experience is I worked at Civil. I was the global head of news at Civil, and Twitter. Sorry, I worked at Twitter. I work at Civil now. I was the global head of I've had a lot of jobs. I was the global head of news at Twitter, and there are issues with Twitter. I could spend a long time telling you about the issues with Twitter. However, there was something really wonderful, I just want to get this out, in the democratization of the way that people could get information, and more importantly, that eyewitnesses could share information about what they were seeing on the ground. So there's a kernel of something really wonderful there that, unfortunately, and here's where I'm going to turn negative again, can get bastardized by the impact of algorithms, which is exactly what Roger's getting at, which is an algorithm which is filtering what you see based on what the tech company thinks you want to see, which will keep you on site longer, which will sell more ads, and on and on. And in Twitter in particular, there's issues of abuse. That's not necessarily the subject we're here to talk about. I mean, one of the things we're doing, and I won't go on a long rampage about Civil as much as I would love to, is one of the reasons I wanted to join this startup is because we want to correct, there's a lot of skepticism about blockchain, but one of the things we want to do, because blockchain is so nascent in the same way that, in the early 90s, the World Wide Web was nascent, and in the early O's, these platforms were nascent. We want to begin by anticipating the things that could go wrong and built in exactly what Roger was saying, built in the mechanisms to guard against those from the get-go. This sort of techno-utopianism that was sort of embraced by tech companies, that if we just give everybody the tools, the world will become a happy, wonderful place, and we'll all be good, is sadly just not reality.
Siva, would you like to get your specialty is Facebook?
When we talk about democracy, we can't just stick to stuff I like, movements I like, results I like, right? Democracy is much messier than that. Democracy means being able to suspend your indignation when stuff you like doesn't happen and your side loses. Sometimes that feels tougher and tougher to do every day. So what do I mean by Facebook undermines democracy? Well, democracy requires two dynamics in any democratic republic. Number one is motivation. You have to be able to organize among people who are like-minded, share tasks and agendas, get them to show up in a certain place at a certain time, get them to take some action, ultimately voting, right? But it's not limited to voting. It also means getting together to voice your opinion, getting together to shout someone down if it comes to it, right? There are all these different ways that democracy works as a cultural phenomenon, not just an electoral phenomenon. But the other, and I think more important part of democracy, dynamic of democracy, is deliberation. The more and more that we perform our politics through Facebook and to a lesser extent Twitter, the less and less we focus on deliberation. Those mediums are not good for deliberation. In fact, they're designed horribly for deliberation. They're designed for quick thinking. They're designed for pulling your mind away from one train of thought to another, derailing trains of thought. They're designed to fracture your attention. They're designed to make you think that the next thing you see might be more interesting than the last thing you see. They're also designed explicitly to favor short bursts of expression, eruptions rather than deliberations, eruptions rather than thought. If you consider the effect in a macro sense and the effect that the success of companies like Facebook and Google have had in advertising to undermine the ability of work, the ability to produce work that actually does engage deeply with thought, you see a big long-term problem. Because we do so much of our activity through these media, because we spend so much of our time and perform our politics on Facebook, on WhatsApp, on Twitter to a lesser degree, we are becoming worse at thinking collectively, considering ways to address problems that affect us all. We can't think our way out of problems anymore, it seems. Not that we were ever great at it, but we always thought we were always striving to be better at it. And for most of US history, and let's say human history, we've been inching toward that sense. We've got to be better at deliberating about our problems. We've got to at least start from a shared set of facts. Even that seems to be eroding. Now, Facebook didn't start that problem, but Facebook turns out to be the perfect platform for any force in the world that benefits from undermining the practices and culture of democracy. If you wanted to invent a propaganda platform, a propaganda system to support authoritarianism, to support nationalism, you could not invent one better than Facebook.
Jim, you're in local journalism and you've been working in national journalism for a long time. We got the midterms coming up. What are you seeing?
Well, I mean, I think in social media in general, I mean, I was mentioning last night the Mark Twain quote about statistics, which I think is a perfect summation also of social media, which is people use statistics like a drunk uses a lamppost, not for illumination, but for support. And I do think it applies perfectly to social, which is people show up, my experience is in the ESPN ombudsman job, the most disappointing thing you realize rather quickly, I'm so awkwardly positioned here, sorry, hello everybody back there, is that people don't really want to debate the issue, they want to discredit the arguer, right? So it's like, instead of saying, I don't like your argument, I'm going to try to take your argument apart. I had the biggest controversy I had there was over Jamel Hill's comment about Trump and white supremacy. And a lot of people didn't agree with the column, and that's fine. But when I tried to get into debates with people about the actual issue, they were too busy going back through 7 years of my tweets trying to find something they could pull out that would discredit me rather than take on the argument. And I'm not an idiot. I've been on Twitter for 7 years, and you can go through there, and you're pretty much going to know I'm a huge Jets fan, and they make my life miserable. I travel and stay in a lot of hotels, and I have opinions about digital media. But you think you're going to find like something in there that's really problematic? Good luck. But that was the instinct people had, was I just need to attack you. And the idea that because I don't like the idea that you had. And I think that's what bothers me the most, is sort of the dehumanization of people on social media, which is you're just a thing I need to knock down because you're in my way, rather than a human being who should be debated with. So, and I think that's the fear I have, is that I don't see that getting any better in the environment.
Look what we saw yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a perfect encapsulation of the worst of that.
And to be honest, like whatever side of that you're on, you have 20 million people on Twitter mocking people who are under 1,000 times more pressure than any of us will be under probably in our lives, and it just feels a little, like we're just like mining people's pain and grief or it feels bad watching it. It feels like a circus to me.
Dehumanizing.
It's dehumanizing, and that's the fear. This is a great opportunity to talk to all these people who you couldn't get to normally, and then I tweet a lot less than I used to because I just have gotten to the point where, what's the point?
Well, this is a really important thing. the education system that we've all been going through for the last year and a half about what these things are doing has changed people's behavior. In North America and Western Europe, we are on average spending less time on Facebook than we used to. And the really important thing to recognize is that just because something is shared by someone who's either a friend or a group you belong to doesn't mean it's reliable, right? That's been the hardest thing. No, but I'm not joking. There's a natural, you want to believe that the stuff coming from your friends is better, right? And I think we all kind of innocently went for that, myself included. And so that was a hard thing to come to grips with. And the challenge that we face here is that the problem is there's not just the democracy issue. There's public health issues. Think about children in particular, teenagers. Think about the privacy issues, and then think about the dampening effect of having monopolists running the most important sectors of our economy. But in the democracy space, we have a midterm election coming up, and there's a lot of attention right now towards foreign interference. The Russians or Iran have already been caught, and now there are accusations of China. But we're not paying attention to the fact that there's also domestic threats. The Cambridge Analytica data set is still in the hands of one party. The hacked information from the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and the Democratic National Committee is still in the hands of the other party. Those are tools which, when used inside Facebook, had an enormous impact in 2016 and are going to have some impact this time around. Now, the key question is, can we get enough people to vote to offset that impact? That's really what this is about. And by the way, when I say offset, whatever side you vote on, what you want to do is have a free and fair election. We want to have everybody be registered. We want everybody to vote what their beliefs are. I'm completely with Siva on this issue. If the country has fair information and votes for one side that I happen to disagree with, God bless, that's democracy. But that's not what we have today. What we have now is an imbalance created because the economic interests of these guys require them to try to get us into outrage cycles, right? The way you keep people engaged, you appeal to their low-level lizard brain emotions, fear and anger, right? I mean, there's this whole thing on YouTube, the 3 degrees of Alex Jones, right? When you go onto YouTube, there are dozens of categories where the first thing you look at is real, and then each of the recommendations after that is conspiracy theories. By the third one, you're at Alex Jones, and that's only because he's peak conspiracy, right? And so, my point is, it's not about politics. Those things aren't about politics. They're about generating economic value through emotions, right? And allowing that kind of thing to intersect with democracy is just an inherently bad idea.
Let's move off platforms a little bit and segue into what all of you, I think, talked about the effect on the consumer. Great modern thinker Dave Chappelle said this in his Netflix special recently. He was talking about the Challenger and how, when everyone was watching the Challenger, the teacher would roll in the TV, and then you would watch it explode, and then you would have hours to process about what happened. And then nowadays, especially this week probably, it feels like every day it's a Challenger. So he wonders, how can you care about anything when you know everything, right? And this is something, Roger, that I've watched some of your interviews recently too. If you're trying to maintain attention, if you're fighting for a share of 24 hours of people's lives, it turns out that the way you keep people's attention is you either scare them or make them angry, which is kind of what you said. And then there's all these concepts about neuromarketing and ego depletion. And
it's also worse. The other problem is because of the existence of Google, the value of genuine expertise and knowledge has been eliminated because we come to believe that because Google's available, we're an expert, right? We can look up our own medical diagnosis. We can look up all the, hang on. Seriously, I do it. I got to believe many of you do this also, right? And the problem is if you don't value expertise, then suddenly it's harder to address hard problems.
So what is where is the consumer on this?
Let's be careful. None of us are consumers unless we're buying ads.
Yeah,
right?
okay.
The advertisers are the consumers.
Sure.
We're cattle.
Cattle.
We're fuel, really.
Cattle,
we're
fuel,
more
we're pods in the matrix, whatever you want to say, right? Like our role to these companies is trivial as individuals. And that's a hard thing for Americans, especially, to get into their minds. Like, your actions are limited, your range of responses is limited if you're considering your range of responses only in terms of your relationship to these companies, right? First of all, try going without Google for a week, right? Good luck at that, right? We're so dependent and became so dependent in no time. Company's been around for 20 years, right? You've probably been using it regularly for 18 years, 16 years, something like that. And you are deeply dependent on it. I am too, we all are. That's weird. It's also really dangerous. The company can change, the company can shift, the company can go away, not soon, right? There are lots of ways that it should trouble us. Our relationship with Facebook is that we are one of 2.2 billion people. That's a lot of commas and a lot of zeros. That's 8 zeros after the second 2, right? Think of how many things in the world touch 2.2 billion people. Like there's oxygen, there's water, and there's Facebook, right? I mean, that's a third of the population of the Earth, and Facebook does no business in China yet, right? So that's stunning. Not only that, so yeah, Roger said the time used for Facebook in North America has dipped. The enrollment with Facebook, or monthly active users for Facebook in North America has flatlined, but North America means less and less every day. There are 220 million Facebook users in the United States. There are 250 million Facebook users in India. That's only a quarter of the population of India. And the growth there is substantial. And also, the growth in GDP per capita and GDP per year is substantial in India as well. So over time, Facebook is much more about India than the United States. So what do we do as Americans who are concerned? Well, not much, right? Quitting Facebook's not going to make a difference to Facebook. Facebook doesn't care. It will shut you off from your cousin whose kid is about to graduate from high school, you know, who you might talk to once a year. And that's a loss, right? That's a real thing. 2.2 billion people aren't fools. We all use Facebook for some reason, usually some good reason, right? But what's left to us? If we're not consumers and we can't boycott, right, because nobody will care, and if we're not valuable as just one person among 2.2 billion, then all that's left to us is to behave as citizens. Behaving as citizens is our hardest job. There's no manual, there's no licensing for it, but it means that you have to, first of all, convince yourself of certain things in the world, right? Train yourself, educate yourself, and then align yourself with other people who care, and then motivate yourself to push for some change at the regulatory or legislative level. This is all really hard and getting harder every day, and the door's closing on us. So if we don't act as citizens, if we don't say, here are some important values, that the data we create as individuals should be ours and we should have some say over how it's used, and we should not be abused and manipulated because we happen to have these boxes in our pockets and we walk around all day, right? We didn't agree to let all of that location data end up in the hands of who knows who through these systems, which is basically what happened. Cambridge Analytica is like nothing compared to the real spread of data from Facebook for many years. So what we've ultimately got to do is assert ourselves to our governments and demand that they take our interests more seriously than they take these companies. Again, not an easy thing to do. The path forward is not clear. It's going to take many years to even come up with a successful legislative agenda if there is one. But I don't think we have much choice.
Vivian, you wanted to add something?
Oh, no, I was just going to say it's actually worse than that. Because
Thank you for coming to our TED Talk.
I've given hundreds of these talks. That's the first time I've heard that.
Don't be so nice to them.
We'll be serving stiff drinks in the lobby after this.
Yeah, exactly.
No beer, though. No more beer. Go ahead.
I love beer. I still love beer. So, sorry. No, which is that, you know, in this country, yes, we are all, you know, we're probably all Facebook users and it does add value, like you say. But in some parts of the world, Facebook is the internet. We have other options. And we live in a country with a First Amendment. Yes, it's perhaps under assault. Yes, the press is under assault. However, there are other sources of information. There are parts of the world where Facebook truly, like Myanmar, where Facebook is the internet, and that is the sole source of information, where it's about your mobile phone, there's no laptop, there's not broadband, and that is, it's even scarier in those parts of the world.
I would just say one thing, though, is that Facebook, all the platforms are clearly accelerating a lot of these problems, but sometimes we have to be honest and look at these things, and we have to look at ourselves in the mirror too. That, you know, hyper-partisanship started before Facebook and Twitter were, you know, started in the early 2000s, Iraq War. Those social media platforms were
Early 90s, really.
Yeah, well, I mean, it got worse.
Hyperpartisanship started when one of the apostles decided to turn on.
Well, that's true. but I would say it's certainly gotten a lot worse in the last 15 years. That even preceded a little bit of the social, and I think at times we, you know, like I just don't think we should absolve ourselves as humans.
But
of
let's
our
remember that we're talking about
contributions.
what people in my business, forgive me, call socio-technical systems.
Yeah.
To examine the technology independent of human values and actions and habits leaves you unable to actually make sense of it. To examine society, absent the tech tools that we use, does the same thing. Facebook affects us as people, people affect Facebook. It's a cycle, it's dynamic, right? So what we see here is exactly that. These tendencies predate Facebook, but Facebook amplifies all these tendencies. Well, just one more thing. But here's the thing about understanding the dynamic relationship. All of these tools extend what we already do, right? Extend things we want to do. We have to choose our tools carefully. Now, our species has been around for millions of years. Facebook's been around since 2004. So we weren't about to fix ourselves in a hurry, right? So at least we can focus on trying to fix Facebook in the short term.
So the thing I would observe is, if you go to the mid-50s, the generation that dominated as adults in America then had gone through the Depression and through the Second World War using collective action as the way you solved problems. It's how we beat the Nazis, how we beat the Depression, it's how we built the highway system, how we went to the moon. But beginning in the 50s, the consumer marketing world really began. So in, say, 1955, the average adult was an engaged citizen.
The average white adult.
Fair enough. Well, actually, really well said. So the average white adult was an engaged citizen. The business strategy was to convert everybody into a consumer, give them what they wanted, right? So if you're an engaged citizen, you understand compromise is part of the process of democracy. If you are a consumer and used to getting what you want, that isn't the same thing. After 9/11, President Bush said to us, the thing you can do as a citizen to be the most helpful to this country is to go shopping. That is 3 years before Facebook was launched. So it was 3 years after Google was launched, 3 years before Facebook. The reason this matters is that, again, they didn't create this thing. We were a nation of passive consumers, not active citizens, before they showed up. What they did was to provide the perfect tools to manipulate a country of passive consumers for political ends. And we didn't see it coming. I didn't see it coming. I suspect most of you didn't see it coming. And the challenge is, what are we going to do about it now? This isn't about whether you're left or right. This is about, are you an American or are you not an American? Do you believe in the Constitution? Do you not believe in the Constitution? Do you believe in equal opportunity? Do you not believe in equal opportunity? The underlying technology of social media and search are not the problem. It is the business model and the incentives created by it that creates the problem. And because these companies are monopolists, it's impossible for new entrants to come in and deliver a different model. So when we're thinking about policy solutions, the first thing you have to find is a way to create space for alternatives to develop. And that can't happen. I say this as somebody who spent 35 years creating these kinds of companies. It's currently not possible. The reason so much money is going into crypto, the reason so much money is going to scooters, the reason so much money is going to businesses that do things your mother used to do for you, is because there are no traditional technology opportunities now because they're blocked by these guys.
Let's dovetail real quick into the media and our role in it, right? Dana Boyd spoke recently at O&A about the manipulation of media here in Austin. The manipulation of media and reporters, signal boosting these things that adds to the questions of the nature of our reality. Is this a matter of comprehensive training that we need to do in the media? Even within this realm, there's debate about the media's culpability in spreading disinformation. Vivian, I
Yeah.
want to talk to you,
Yeah.
and Jim, you as well.
Yeah, well, the challenge is the media, that journalists, by and large, it's really, I don't want to paint it with such a broad brush, but what people generally call the mainstream media, quality media, has not sort of caught up with the changing norms in society today. And so we as journalists have been trained all our lives to be sort of even-tempered, to to state the facts, listen to the other side, provide a voice to the other side. If there's something people are talking about, to present it in a cool, rational fashion. Yes, to debunk it, but it might be paragraph 6. And there is just the metabolism that has come from, the kind of rhetoric from a president who's sort of tweeting his id, and from everything that we've been talking about in this panel, the way news has circulated. Journalists, by and large, are having a hard time with this. I mean, we've never had to deal before with a situation where lies, the word lie is really hard for journalists to say, are coming at us so fast, and then so there's this deliberation. Well, it's a lie if it is absolutely premeditated and intentional. It's a misstatement if it's this, and you just, you get into this kind of Socratic conversation, and the next thing you know, the train has left the station. And so it's very, you're seeing a news media that is sort of convulsing and trying to adapt, keep journalistic standards, which is absolutely must happen, but adapting to the norms of the world we live in today.
And I'd even add to that, I pity everybody who's a White House or anybody covering politics these days, because for a long time we've been encouraging them to show more voice in social media. They want to build their following because this is a marketing tool. And so you're sort of encouraging people to be a little edgier than they used to be. And so now you're a White House reporter and you say something like, I don't think what Trump said is true, and all of a sudden you're getting killed for saying like, oh, now you're throwing opinions out there. And at the same time, you have people who are trying to attack reporters, and they do what I mentioned earlier. Go back, do like 2 years of tweets, find 3 Maggie Haberman tweets that they can use to discredit her, rather than actually challenge the reporting. So I do pity the reporters who are in that position of being told, have more voice, be more energetic, talk to people on social media, but like, don't do anything that's going to cause a problem.
The same applies to Sports Center anchors.
Yeah, right. Same to Sports Center anchors, right? Just be more aggressive, and we want them to know. I mean, when I was doing the ESPN job, ESPN was very clear. They wanted the anchors to show more personality. They wanted them to be open about what teams they rooted for, rather than keeping that to themselves. And that got into politics and got them into some trouble. But the idea is they are being given very difficult tightropes to walk. And often, and the problem is, Gene knows this too. Often you find out when you violated a social media policy after you've done it. Like you don't really know exactly what the line in the policy is, and the only way you find out that you violated is when someone says they can't do that. It's like, well, where is it in this document?
So the other problem you have here is that Google in particular, and now Facebook, have really undermined the economics of journalism. And they use this protection of a rule called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which was originally a safe harbor to protect the nascent internet from nuisance lawsuits over pornography and over copyright violations. And they've used that safe harbor and basically completely destroyed the economics of media. At the same time, Twitter comes along, and an industry that had historically followed the Associated Press feed as the starting point shifts over to Twitter because it's trying to be more current and trying to get with this program of the guys who are destroying them. Well, the problem with that is that the AP attempted to be about substance, and Twitter is about trending. And so journalism shifted to this model where you're trying to maintain historic standards while also trying to appeal to this trending thing. And it turned out it wasn't very good at either one of these things, right? And we've also got this cult of personality where the whole economy has tried to adopt the culture of technology, because technology is so important that we want our leaders in every industry to adopt the ethos of these people who are, shall we say, not completely balanced, right? They don't have full liberal arts educations, and so maybe they aren't, in fact, that model may not, in fact, be appropriate outside of tech. In fact, may not even be appropriate inside tech. And that circularity is a really severe problem. And again, it's going to be super hard to break without everybody getting together.
And let's not let the algorithms off the hook either. So what Dana Boyd was talking about, was this notion of algorithmic amplification and the fact that we, at this point in time, are fairly powerless against these dynamic movements that spread garbage. So you can, the phrase fake news, I think is thoroughly inadequate to discuss this phenomenon, is often deployed for this. But think about garbage in general, conspiracy theories.
The business is driven by conspiracy
Well,
theories.
so here's why, right? So let's say today I go home and I look on the Economist website and I see a really well thought out, well reported, deep analysis of how the coalition government in Italy is challenging current European Union monetary policy. Who's fallen asleep at this point? Right? So believe me, I've been putting 20-year-olds to sleep for years with this, so I know how to do it. And look, I put that on Facebook. Maybe I have a friend in Italy. Maybe I have a friend who's really into monetary policy. Give me a thumbs up on it, right? Yeah, nice that you posted that, right? But chances are, I can guarantee that article will sink like a stone on Facebook. It's just not getting shared. It's just not going anywhere, right? But it's about something really important. If I then post something like some wacky stuff like, vaccines cause autism, or, Barack Obama was born in Kenya, I would immediately, and I can even find a web page that supports this, or I can definitely find a YouTube video that supports this, right? And I post it on Facebook. Immediately, what I will get from my group of friends are hundreds, maybe thousands of angry responses showing me why I'm wrong, links to actually well-researched pieces, maybe the Centers for Disease Control, maybe some major newspaper, and they will debunk what I have claimed. They will argue against it, all very effectively. And that's what we're all taught to do, right? We're taught if someone puts something out there to undermine it with facts or address it with facts and try to change his or her mind, or at least the audience's mind. That's what we're supposed to do in life as well as in a democratic republic. But you do it on Facebook and you just amplify what I just put. So that means that nutcase thing I just put up there hits more news feeds faster, more often, and higher, because it gets hundreds of comments. And that's what Facebook counts as engagement. Facebook only measures it mathematically, not qualitatively. Facebook doesn't care that what I wrote is absolutely nutcase stuff. The very fact that it got hundreds of people responding to me amplified it, and somewhere along the line, someone might buy what I said, right? Somebody out there might buy what I said. You cannot argue with the crazy on Facebook.
I just want to up-level this conversation while we're talking about journalism, because I think it's really, really important. There are, forgive me if I get pedantic for a second, we are facing twin crises when it comes to news media. And by the way, when we talk about a crisis in journalism, it's a crisis for citizens, because journalisms enable democracies to flourish. So it's not about journalists keeping jobs, okay? It's about all of us. There are twin crises. It's a perfect crisis. Number one is the trust crisis. Everything we've talked about, which is the foundation of agreed upon fact is eroding really fast. You've seen it. We see it time and time again. We've been talking about it. This in and of itself is cataclysmic. The second crisis is the financial model. So the old ways that news organizations were able to support themselves have collapsed. Facebook and Google, to their credit, have found a brilliant way to suck up a lot of those ad dollars, to pull a lot of that revenue in. And this is not just in the United States, everywhere in the world. You have these two massive things colliding, both of which have been enabled by social media, and that is, these two things are leading to the crisis that we're in. The most important thing, now I'm going to get on my soapbox just for 1 second, the most important thing you could do, I'm amused that this is, a water company, my bottle says support nonprofit news, so support Texas Tribune, the greater Texas Water Company tells you support your local news organization, whether it's nonprofit or not, that are doing important work, support what we're doing at Civil, support journalism, buy subscriptions, pay for membership, do whatever you can, because it is essential.
I have a hopeful note.
Can I add to
I
that?
have a hopeful statement.
Support Jim Brady's news efforts.
Speaking of news, we just had breaking news. As many as 90 million Facebook users will have to log back into their accounts after the social network admitted on Friday that hackers had stolen security tokens associated with 50 million user profiles.
Now I know why I have to log on to that.
It's time to sell.
I do want to say one thing, taken at a very local perspective. There's that stat that 10% of people think the Senate's doing a good job, or the Congress is doing a good job, but 50% of people like their congressman. There is a little bit of that in local news, that more people like their local news organization. They think they like the media. And if you look at the quality of the dialogue when you get closer to the ground, it is much better. Like on the 3 sites that we run, you don't see as much of the absolute horror that you see discussing national and global issues. And so I'm hopeful that's why I said hopeful. I do think that area is an area where hopefully we don't go down the
There's
same
more
path.
hopeful than that, because we actually have the power here. And this is the thing that's been so hard for all of us to recognize. These companies need us. Yes, we are just the fuel, but they need fuel to run these things. So if we change our behavior, but more importantly, if we let our voices be heard. I started with one other person in April a year ago, just running into rooms with my hair on fire, okay? And at that time, there was no conversation at all. Now there's this conversation. He's been working on this for 10 years. There's a real thing going on here. And here's the key point. In order to give journalism a chance, we have to stop the destruction of its model by these guys. And the only way to do that is the good old-fashioned way. We can actually use their tools to organize people into indivisible groups, into the equivalent of book clubs. Because look, if you have teenage children, you have to protect them against Instagram. You really do. You have to protect them against texting, because this is killing a whole generation of young people. And this is a disaster. And we have to organize politically the same way. We have to reduce the share of voice that these companies have in our public square, and we have to insist that they bear the full cost. If they're going to run the public square, they have to assume the responsibility. And we have the political power to make that happen.
So let's talk about regulation, because I know, do you guys have questions? Questions? You might want to ask questions? I want to make time for questions. But let's talk about regulation. We talked last time about it being a blunt instrument. Right. Is that something that...
So there are 2 pieces of legislation I would like to see. They're both necessary but insufficient. They're also highly unlikely, as all legislation is currently highly unlikely. Number 1 is we need data protection in the United States along the model of the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe. It's under consideration in Brazil. It's under consideration in Australia.
And it's been implemented in California.
California, to halfway.
Halfway.
Right? But what we have right now is kind of an ugly scene where the California law is a thorn to these companies, and so they are actually working to write the bill in Congress to undermine the California law. The same way that auto companies always try to undermine CAFE standards and mileage standards in California, so it doesn't affect the whole country. So we got a problem there. That's trivia though for now. The other thing that we really have to do is reinvigorate antitrust to be more like antitrust was in the early part of the 20th century, when it was concerned with the concentrations of power, not just the ability to set prices in the market. It's been degraded down to a simple arithmetic formula. The person who's most responsible for doing that, by the way, is Robert Bork. I know that was his first career before everything spun out of control since. But we really have had no effective antitrust for decades, with occasional exceptions, as Microsoft might argue. But ultimately, we need to be able to look at companies that have managed to either purchase or quash potential competitors at the gestational level, which is what Facebook and Google have been doing for years. There's no reason why Facebook should have been allowed to buy Instagram. There's no reason why Facebook should have been allowed to buy WhatsApp. But right now, the top social media platforms in the world, if you take out 2 of them that only operate in China, and you go through the top 5, they are Facebook with 2.2 billion users, YouTube with 1.9 billion users. Then it goes 3 of them at between 800 million and 1 billion, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Instagram. All of them owned by Facebook. 4 of the top 5 are owned by Facebook.
WhatsApp's at 1.5 now.
Is it? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Had a good week. All right, so look, that's the level of concentration we have in that industry. And that affects advertisers, right? So if advertisers can find a reason to complain, but right now, this whole system's great for advertisers, so they're not complaining, which is why we as citizens need to address it in a different way. We can't be plaintiffs in this, but we've got to make sure that our legislators work on this, but it's going to take a decade. That's why I say it's necessary but insufficient. It has to actually weirdly start in the law review articles and then build their way into the case law and get some new appointments to the FTC. Again, too geeky, you don't need to know all this. But that's really all that's on the table right now. But what we really need to do as citizens is build up those institutions, support those institutions that help us think. because that's what we've given up on. We need to reinvest in public libraries, public schools, public universities. We need to reinvest in institutions, rooms like this that let people come together, talk, hear, think. We need to reinvest in journalistic institutions like the Texas Tribune, like ProPublica. We need to make sure we value, not just with our dollars, but with our voices, the good work done by good journalists, even for publications that are imperfect, right? We should not hold a grudge against that. We have to do this not just because we like this story that says this that makes us feel better and smarter. We have to do this because in the long run, democracy depends on it. We have to rebuild those institutions so we can actually think, because otherwise we have nothing else to work with.
And one more thing, though. We also have to reach out to people with whom we disagree and find our areas of common ground, right?
I was going to make that point about the algorithm, which is to your point about the conspiracy. You're better off sharing an article that's a well-written article that you completely disagree with and get more people to share that just so a well-thought-out opinion is getting more attention than sharing Alex Jones.
My point
we
is
don't do that because we're afraid of the backlash.
The well-thought-out stuff will still sink because it doesn't generate anger.
Yeah, it may not be enough,
right.
but because half the people won't retweet anything they disagree with, you already start with a smaller, and and partially because they're afraid of the backlash of, you look at you can predict every Facebook thread, when somebody says, I don't agree with this, but I'm posting it anyway, and it still ends up being a terrible thread. So I wish that the bipartisanship of just sharing well-thought-out ideas that we don't agree with would be a start, but I'm not confident.
Well-thought-out ideas just won't work.
You have to talk. So technology created this problem. Technology can't solve it, right? At least a third of all the people in the United States identify with at least one issue that's demonstrably false. It may be as large as half the country, right? If you take in climate change denial, contrails, anti-vax, QAnon, all these things, that can only be cured by getting together as a community, right? We have to go face to face again. We can't all be staring at our screens and expect that to solve the problem. It just won't. And, I feel terrible because I spent my whole life building technology. And, now I'm trying to help find a better path.
Well, just think of everything we have said in this entire panel was a tweet or on Facebook. What do you think the responses would be? It's a difference between sitting in a room with people listening and having a discussion versus putting it all online. It doesn't invite the same level of vitriol that putting it in digital platforms does.
And thank you for not being vitriolic.
Yeah. We haven't gotten to the questions yet.
We haven't
Speaking of engagement, let's open it up for questions. I guess there's mics over here, but up there, let's go
wave
with
your
you.
hand if you have someone up there.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Just yell down at us.
Yeah, I will have questions.
Yeah.
Can you talk about well, let me just say this. I'm going to have to write out. The two senators in this state don't answer phones. And so as a result, I'm communicating with them through Facebook and through Twitter, just so I can at least get my point made, even though I know they're not listening to it. As a result, it's really interesting because I get told that I'm a troll and that I have no business on their official Facebook page. And I'm like, I'm sorry. It says right there that I'm a constituent, but what role does that play in democracy?
I feel your pain.
That's a separate set.
So again, I think getting together face to face is the key thing. Go to the offices. I mean, you know the problem because you're obviously doing it, but that is the issue, right? We've allowed technology to mediate all these things, and they're using technology to protect themselves from the actual human consequences of their actions.
Even though the term of art is outreach on Capitol Hill, that way they think their Facebook page is outreach.
Hey, can I just say, I love this. We have nothing but women. I am so psyched. Who's up?
Let's go with you, ma'am.
Hi, so I'm a social media manager at UT, and so I work on social media. So I use social media a lot.
My condolences.
And so I was curious to know, we've talked a lot about the evils of social media and how it's kind of like degraded democracy, but there's also been instances where social media has been used to uplift democracy.
Yeah.
And so I was curious to know if any of you could comment on that and how we can use these tools, because they're not going anywhere anytime soon. So how can we use these tools to kind of undermine what they're doing?
So going back to my original point of the distinction between motivation and deliberation, I don't think that social media has been used to enhance democracy. I think social media has been used in certain cases to enhance movements that I happen to like, right? So I love that the mall in Washington, D.C. was filled with 2 million women with 2 weeks' notice, right? And a lot of that happened on Facebook. And that's part of what we can do in a democracy, but that dynamic doesn't necessarily enhance the culture and process and health of democracy, right? So it's a very different thing, right? And I do want to caution about looking back to the spring of 2011 and the uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt, because that has been terribly misunderstood, especially over here. Almost nobody in Tunisia and Egypt used Facebook or Twitter at that time. A handful of people. They were all cosmopolitan. They all lived in Tunis or Cairo, and most of what they did with social media was inform people outside of Tunisia and Egypt what was going on, meaning journalists, right? So we got this weird impression that all this was happening on Facebook and Twitter because journalists were following Twitter, and that's how they learned about it, because we've pulled all the reporters out of North Africa over the years, right? But the fact is, people who rose up in the streets of Cairo did so because the price of bread doubled in 6 months. People rose up in the streets of Tunisia because of massive corruption, right? And actually corruption and police brutality applied to both states. There were real issues there, and people put their bodies on the line. People died, people were bloodied. The prevailing party in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, had no interest in democracy. They were not fighting for democracy, they were fighting for theocracy. Just because people rise up against an oppressor doesn't mean that what they want to install resembles what we would call democracy, right? There were massive uprisings in 1979 all across Iran. The last thing those people ultimately wanted and got was democracy.
Let's go
Keep doing what you're doing, though. You're organizing communities.
Well,
It's great.
Yeah, use the technology
Yeah.
against those companies. Organize the people into indivisible groups. Go and occupy, okay?
Ma'am, go ahead.
Okay, hi, my name is Emily Glankler. I'm a high school social studies teacher, and this is just adding to all the anxiety I've already been feeling about teenagers and social media, and I'm also a parent, so I would love for something like tangible, some like tangible advice when I walk into my classroom on Monday, or when parents walk home today, like, what can we do right now?
No computers in the classroom, no exposure to screens under the age of 2, under an hour a day up to age 12. But nothing in the classroom. What you want to do is use the classroom to create social interaction, to take advantage of having all the people in the room.
Schools are moving to like, we're all on Google Classroom.
Yeah.
Right,
Like
no,
literally
but,
on
right, and Google gives you those devices to get the kids hooked on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the problem. We have to break that cycle. But you asked for the practical thing.
Yeah.
Sadly, the practical thing requires reversing field on a thing that we've believed in fervently for 20 years.
I don't know if I don't necessarily agree with no computers in the classroom. I don't mean for 2-year-olds, but for high school. But you can help educate your students you can help make them more media and technology and news literate. I know that is not the solution to all things, but I don't think computers are going to go away anytime soon. I'm not sure that they should, but to help them understand all the dynamics that we're talking about here today.
Yeah, but kids aren't the problem. 50-year-olds are the problem.
Yeah, that's true, actually. You're right.
That is also true. And go ahead.
Hi, I'm from Oklahoma City, and so we have the Daily Oklahoman, but if you just saw the paper recently, it just got purchased again. So it's owned by a company now that owns another paper, the Journal Record, too, which I wouldn't in the paper. But for most of my life, I've refused to subscribe to the Daily Oklahoman because I know the Gaylord family, they're real nice, but they had it, and then I can't remember, that guy who was in Colorado had it, and it's been so cited one way or the other that we kind of have a news desert where I live. Now, I do pay for the Washington Post, and I do pay for the New York Times.
Bless up.
And I'm a Slate Plus member, which is what got me down here.
You need local
I mean,
news.
if you live where I live, I'd love some local news to be able to.
Jim?
Yeah, Jim, you should take it.
Oklahoma City, next city. We'll come.
Yeah, you're going to Oklahoma
Yeah.
No, I'm joking. I would love to, but we're
But maybe
looking at
you can
expanding,
help
but-
to organize, right? Again, one of the interesting things about this is the same thing works at the school board level that works in Washington, D.C., right? Which is the basic indivisible model of direct engagement. You know, the great thing about local communities is, generally speaking, a lot of the functions, because they're physically closer, are more accessible. And if you get enough people doing it, maybe we can crowdsource a lot of that news.
There's several organizations
Yeah.
that are, I mean, Civil's one of them, but there's others as well. What Jim is doing it that are enabling through financially and through other means of support the bubbling up of new local news organizations to fill those news deserts. So just keep. What's that?
That's right.
There you go. There you go. Exactly.
Well, there's a few of the people at the Daily Oklahoma I do follow,
Yeah, yeah.
so I have no idea what's going to happen at the paper now. I don't.
Okay.
I don't know.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is probably too broad of a question, but I'm sure I can simplify it. I'm a former ABC News and, believe it or not, Fox News journalist who now has to spend time on both sides of the aisle trying to explain that. But I advise clients on how to use new media and how to work and advocate for truth and their own stories. So my question to you that's been bothering me for, I guess, 20 years now is, I believe that Facebook and Twitter are media companies. And is there any way that we can, aside from regulation, really convince them of that fact? They seem at all the hearings to talk about trying to bring in all these news authorities, and I know many of you come from that world, but is that ever going to happen, that they're ever going to perceive that they really are media companies?
They dodge that definition to escape from what Roger pointed out, right? This safe harbor, to keep themselves within the safe harbor that does not protect traditional broadcast and print outlets, right? But the thing is, it's not that they're not media companies, it's that they are sui generis. There's never been anything like that, right? So the taxonomy game, I think, misses the point. I think it's a different question of whether this Section 529 of the Communications Decency Act should apply to them, and if so, how. That's like a whole other policy argument. But the real challenge is to make sense of them as they are. We've never had anything like Facebook ever. And we've never had anything like Google ever, and we've never had anything like Twitter ever. And I think the proper way to address it is to look at what they do in the world. And I happen to think that the main thing they do is social engineering. They all have a vision for how they would like people to behave and interact with each other, and they structure their technologies to nudge us to behave in that way. To which I always respond, who asked you to nudge us and engineer us, right? That, to me, that's incredible hubris. And hubris is one of the 7 deadly sins, and what brought Icarus down, so maybe there is some hope. But ultimately, I think that's how we have to address this question. But in the meantime, I think we get waylaid into this taxonomy discussion, and I think even the discussion lets them off the hook in a sense, right? We need to look at these problems with fresh eyes, and not necessarily look back to some model of the past. Remember, 2.2 billion people. That brings Facebook to a scale that no other media. Imagine if the BBC had 2.2 billion viewers/listeners. It never has, and it never will. So it's not even comparable.
Well, let's go to the gentleman up there. He's been having his hand up for a while.
So when I think about my 35 years of using technology, almost everything that came to me that was disruptive and then innovative, changed my life, cycled out, became extinct, replaced by something else more innovative. So you said these now, Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, now are monopolies that can't be penetrated.
No, I didn't say can't be, but what they've done is they've had network effects. You guys know what a network effect is? It's when you get one more of something, like another user or another node.
One fax machine is useless, 10 fax machines are useless.
Do you think that they have a half-life and eventually will be replaced by something else? Will there be a post-Facebook and Twitter world?
Only if regulation creates the window for that to happen. On current course and speed, because there's no antitrust regulation, they're buying everything that can threaten them, and now they have frozen the market, so there's almost no money being invested in things that might compete with them. So they've created a huge desert around themselves. That has to be stopped. To be clear, our government, and I know this because I do this now, this is what I do, there are real people in our government who understand how important this issue is and are beginning to look at ways to address the very thing we're talking about. I do think that the conversation has changed. We're still a long way from a solution, and I'm terrified, but it's not impossible, okay?
Good enough.
Thank you. My name is Becky, and I'm a computer scientist, or long-lapsed computer scientist. In fact, when I was writing software, Roger, I think you had short hair.
Possibly.
Yeah.
No, I've had short, it goes up and down, right? And by the way, I've had really long hair.
Okay, I didn't know you then, during that phase. And thank you for writing the book, Saeed. It needs to be written. So I had a phrase that I used to use with teams in the 80s when we were writing software, that someday computers will be useful. And what I didn't also say is that maybe possibly also scary. And I think what we're talking about here is how do we minimize the scary and maximize the useful. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is the role for experienced folks, such as myself, to get more involved into the ethics side of the discussion. They answer the following question: just because we can, does that necessarily mean that we should?
Yes.
Do something.
Yes.
So I'm interested in the follow-on. I think this is one of the most important panels at the festival. How are you going to build on that? And I'd like to ask a question that's been burning me for a couple, 3 weeks, and that was as a result of the hearings that were held that Facebook and a couple of others, not Google, attended. And I'd really like to hear all of y'all's opinion on what possessed Google to not show up.
We were talking about it last night.
I think it was a psychotic breakdown. To be totally clear, I think it was malpractice by the board of directors to allow that to happen. It was clinically insane. I do not understand Google's strategy. But your point about ethics, her point about ethics is profound. And let me just give you 1 minute on it. Steve Jobs had this notion that computers should be a bicycle for our minds. He saw that condors had much more efficient locomotion than humans, but you put a human on a bike and it becomes the most efficient locomotion of any species on Earth, and computers could do that for us. The problem with Google and Facebook is they use artificial intelligence to take over the functions and activities that make us individuals. They take away white-collar work, they take away our ability to think for ourselves. We're using filter bubbles, and they use recommendation engines to tell us what we should like, okay? And that is a dehumanizing thing, and we need to have a real conversation about, hey, wait a minute. Is that what we want? Because we have a trust. We learned for 50 years that we could always trust tech. And these people have exploited that to our detriment. And we just have to recognize that Alexa is really dangerous. With IoT and 5G, you're taking the privacy problem into a third dimension where people will not have the ability to opt out just because they don't buy the product. Because it'll be like going to somebody's house that has firearms, right? You go into a house with Alexa, everything you're doing somebody can listen into because it's a hackable system.
Real quick, sir.
Yeah, so quick question. I have a little bit of a different view, so.
Great.
Good, yeah.
Bring it on.
So in my mind, I think that social media in a lot of ways is very similar to extending the people we really need. Louder. So I think that social media in a lot of ways is very similar to extending the ability to read to people that formerly couldn't read, in so much as we're giving them information, and as an individual who can read, I'm self-selecting. I can choose whatever I want, to read, and I generally believe that that's a good thing, right? I tend to believe that a lot of this discussion is saying, hey, the problem is social media and how do we regulate it? Personally, I think that that the individual, that maybe we're focusing too much on the wrong things, right? So my question is, do you guys see solutions that target the individual to be more aware that this is bad information, or
Right.
Or are there institutions? Because I think it's generally a bad thing to say, don't allow information to be in the world. I think it's a good thing to maybe educate people to discern between good and bad and things like that. So to what extent do the individuals have responsibility, and are other institutions that should help promote that?
Well, look, it's not at all like literacy, because yes, you can choose what to read, but if you use Facebook, Facebook chooses what you read.
Right.
Facebook's algorithms are picking the newsfeed for you. You're not picking that, right? So that's number one. Number two, look, we are all susceptible to being fooled. We are all fallible. We are all busy. We are all, doesn't matter how educated you are. I've been fooled, and I'm supposed to be the biggest critic in the world of this stuff. I've forwarded stuff that I found out rather quickly was not legitimate. I think we've all done it. Maybe you did it and didn't know it, right? The problem can't be focused on training us to beware when there are these powerful machines that are calibrated to undermine any process that allows us to think in clear and deliberate ways about what's true, good, and important in the world. That is how they're calibrated, that is how they're designed, that is the problem. And that is a powerful force working against any of our own critical skills. So that means it doesn't matter how strong you think you are, you will occasionally be fooled. But we're not the problem. The problem is in the ecosystem. The problem is among all of us. So even if I figure it out, you figure it out, all of us in this room figure it out, there are still nearly 2 billion people who aren't figuring it out.
I just want to say it's multifaceted. In addition to the stuff that's being talked about today, education is absolutely key to our high school teacher in the room, education. And I know at the risk of sounding like a hammer that sees everything as a nail, more journalism, more local journalism, more reporting about technology and the tech companies. We're starting to see that happen. Filling news deserts, looking for solutions with all of your help that enable more information getting out in the world. It isn't, even if it gets filtered by Facebook, there are other means that people get information, is absolutely essential.
So I apologize,
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
out of time.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
actually 5 minutes over. I'm gonna, ma'am, if you want to come up and ask questions, you can come up and ask
Yeah, and I'm going to stand
stage.
outside. If anybody
Yeah.
does have a follow-up question, ma'am, I'm going to be outside if you want to.
But thank you so much
Also,
for
make sure you
coming.
buy Steve's book. He's going to be signing it
Yeah.
across the way in the main center there.
I hope you all leave happier.